So now my chance has come. I can welcome you here. Those of you who are here or with us at the Diplomatische Akademie almost precisely 12 months ago do remember Jeremy. He brought us the impacts of Brexit on management consultancy in November 2016. And this today should be a follow-up. Times have changed, things have changed, and we're looking forward to your input, to your information. But I thought that maybe you have the same historic knowledge as I have, none so far, so I thought maybe I summarize up the development on the one hand of the European Union and on the other hand the cooperation or the UK in the European Union. And all this started in 1951 with the Treaty of Paris, when the 6 European countries, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, and I forgot Luxembourg, yeah. Dankeschön. When they started to start a more intense cooperation, an economic cooperation, in different groups, in different cooperations, which was finished in 1957 and went on to 1967, where the European Community was built by those countries. The UK wasn't one of them. It was in 1973 when they joined this community, in 1973. But 2 years later, in 1975, they had their first referendum in UK discussing and voting on whether they should stay or they should leave. And it was, the result was about 67% plus positive for staying in the European Union. It was the first referendum. All those years they had discussions coming up to 1990, where the UK joined the European exchange rate mechanism, this binding, fixing the sterling against the Deutschmark. But also this wasn't a thing of long duration, because 1992 they were forced to leave this mechanism because they couldn't fulfill because they couldn't fulfill the necessities they had, together with the Italians, as much as I understood. If you ask me, then I say please later, because I want to make the point that in 1993 this economic cooperation became the political unity, and in 1999 maybe all of you remember this changing from the franc écu to the euro, and the UK weren't the UK weren't taking part. And there was the second referendum. In all those years from 1973 to 2016, there were a lot of discussion about this membership, but it was only, they had only 2 referendums. One in the second in 2016, as you will remember, and the vote with 51%, 52% were against staying. So it is a very thin result. But the result of this is, according to the contract, according to the regulations, until 2019 they should be finished in all their negotiations, and in March 2019, the latest moment where the UK might leave the European Union. Okay?
I think that's good. You know more about my history than I do. No, that's not
knowing is not the right word. So, Jeremy, please. 12 months passed, yeah? There are a lot of things might have happened in between, so
yes.
The stage is yours.
Okay, so firstly I should apologize for being late. It's okay, I'm on now. Yeah, I can operate. There's a mute button. It's okay. I'm okay with this. Thank you. So one of the reasons why, thank you, Claudia, for the explanation of our history with Europe, which has always been a bit difficult. I think maybe you remember, those of you who came here last year, I spoke a lot about the British involvement in Europe and how politics shaped the way that Britain's relationship with the rest of Europe grew since the 16th and 17th century. What's quite interesting here is that, as Claudia pointed out, we didn't join the euro because London makes its living from arbitrage, from currency. And of course, what we need are many different currencies in London, as many as possible, actually. So for us, the euro was a problem because very quickly 10 currencies became one. So this is no good for us, for London, because we can't arbitrage one against the other. The pound has always been a currency that's in between, previously in between the franc and the mark and the dollar, now between the euro and the dollar. And there's always some fluctuation with the pound. And financial services in London, in UK, you probably know this information, but 2.2 million people in Britain work in financial services, which is a big number, huh? Maybe you have seen some press coverage that 75,000 jobs in financial services in the UK are going to move to Frankfurt and Brussels and other places. So this is only a small amount, 3% of the total workforce. So 75,000 jobs sounds a lot. They are quite highly paid jobs, huh? So not clerical jobs. But even so, it's not such a big problem for most people in Britain thinking about this. Because interestingly, people are coming the other way too. You take organizations, I was reading today, airlines. So EasyJet, you now have EasyJet in Vienna, I think. They have set up their office here, their European operation here, which is good news for Austria. Huh? But Wizz Air from Hungary, next door, they are now setting up an airline operation in UK, so they can continue to operate outside from the UK. So actually we lose some things, we gain some others. So I think it's not going to be such a problem. Maybe I'm optimistic. But since last year, I have some slides. I can show you these, but I will talk at the same time. Maybe not about what is on the screen, if that's okay, if you don't mind. Huh? So, you know, Michel Barnier said this, famously, the clock is ticking. When Boris Johnson, our foreign minister, said that he was asked a question about how big the bill is going to be for us, how big the payment must be. And somebody said it could be 100 billion euros. And his view was, they can whistle, because this is a saying in English, you can whistle, you will never get that. And of course Michel Barnier straight away said, I hear no whistling, I hear the clock ticking, that's all I can hear. And of course, Claudia is right, we have until the 29th of March 2019, 2 years since Article 50 was invoked, to finish the negotiations. Maybe. Nobody has done this before. Maybe they will extend it. Maybe it will be finished before. Maybe some things will happen before the 29th of March. Maybe some things will happen after the 29th of March. Now we are talking, I'm sure you can see in the press and TV, about some kind of transition arrangement. Maybe different transition arrangements for different sectors, for different parts of the process, which maybe will go on for 3 or 4 or 5 more years. Because one thing I think we have all learnt in Europe is that you cannot untangle a country from the EU in 2 years. It's impossible. And we haven't even started yet, have we? We are still just talking. No action has taken place to complete any change. So for me, I think it will take a bit longer than March 2019, personally, but we shall see. Maybe you remember these from last year. This is not a test for those of you who were here last year, but these are some newspaper headlines which I showed you last year, one year ago. And you can see that at the time, this is before Article 50 was declared, there was some optimism about consultancy, about a boom here and another boom for lawyers and another boom. But some people were negative here because it's a big change. Huh? People didn't really know what was going to happen. And I don't think we still know, because if you read the newspapers now, I think they say the same thing, actually. Here's some new newspaper headlines, articles. So here we have management consultants, us, will make a lot of money out of Brexit. Short term, lots of change. Change is good for management consultancy, always. McKinsey, this is McKinsey, that the government, the British government, has signed up now to help somehow. I'm not sure how, but they're going to help. It's not a very big contract for McKinsey. What's this, 2 million euros? They can burn that easily in 3 or 4 weeks, I should think, in most projects. But McKinsey are working with the British government to help them. And interesting, this was something that I read. One of the things that we have seen in the last 5 years, more in the last 2 years, is a political move to the right in most European countries. Austria, of course, you've had your elections recently, and I think this has happened here. And this has been said by a politician from the right. This is not a centre politician who has said this. I have a name written down here. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. Because many people are viewing Britain and the movement out of the EU as a bit of a catalyst for change elsewhere. For a number of reasons, and I will show some later, but one of these reasons is that in future, of course, Britain's budget contribution will not be there, so other people will have to pay that. Maybe the costs will be lower, of course, but not so much, I think. And Britain's attitude to regulation, to process, to procedure is quite flexible. And if our voice disappears, maybe the voices left behind will be more interested in more structure, on balance. So I think there is a possibility that political change will be driven by Britain leaving. And I think we can see that over the last year and 18 months, what's happened across Europe. The Catalan thing is very interesting, Catalonia. Of course, Britain was very quick to say this is not such a good thing, that Spain should stay together, because we don't want the Scottish people declaring that they should be independent. And we've never had that. We don't want that to happen. So politically, it's interesting for Britain to see where Britain stands. Britain, like Spain, is a composition of different countries. And we like to stay together. And so it's important for Britain to make that political statement. But interesting, we like to stay together, but we don't like to stay with you. This is the... But we have a sea in between, of course, you know this. I explained this last time. So for us, Europe is across the water. Britain is Britain, and everywhere else is across the water, somewhere else. The United States, Europe, everywhere. It's not Britain. And yeah, Ireland, you see, now Ireland is a I should say it's a problem, because it is a problem. Ireland has always been a problem since the 1600s for Britain, when the Catholic and Protestant kings from different countries came to fight in Ireland. Very difficult situation. We have part of Britain is in Ireland at the top, and the rest of Ireland is at the bottom, and there is a border. And before the European Union existed, Britain and Ireland always had a common shared travel area. There was no border There were no frontier guards, there was no fence. It's just one island. And it's always been like that. And of course now we go into the EU and there suddenly becomes a problem with the frontier, but there was never a problem before. So we'd just like to go back to like it was before, but I'm not sure whether that's possible. We'll see. So you know, I'm sure, that there are three things at the moment that the negotiators are trying to sort out. One is the border with Ireland. How is this going to work? One, of course, is the rights of citizens, European citizens in Britain and British citizens in Europe. And how is that going to work? And the other one, of course, is the bill. And I think this one is the one that will be the problem. It's easy. You can say we just say yes to some money. 20, 30, 50, 80 billion. You can pick a number, choose a number. It will never be right, but it will never be wrong. Because I think calculating the bill, like a divorce, is what each half will accept. It's not scientific, really. It's what feels fair. And at the moment, there is a big movement in Britain to say that a bill of zero would be fair, not 40, 50, 100 billion, whatever the number is going to be. But I think many people don't understand. Of course, there are commitments that have to be made. And recently a story came out that one of the European bank, one of the banks, we were going to be owed some money in Britain because of our investments and loans as well. So there was a big discussion about money. Unfortunately, money is always a problem, whatever we do. So I'm trying to focus on consultancy because that's where we all come from. We've seen that all and now of the big firms have set up big units with thousands of consultants advising businesses on Brexit. And in the big consulting firms, this is big business because British firms with relationships with European firms need to sort out what to do. European firms with relationships in the UK need to sort out what to do. So in the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, I think there will be a lot of work for multinational business consultants untangling the mess. The supply chains, things of this type. This is a real problem, I think, now. European supply chains are so integrated in automotive manufacturing, for example. Parts go across borders to assemble vehicles in different places. And if suddenly there is some kind of problem in doing that when they go across the channel and back, how is that going to work? Somebody will need to sort that out. I hope, personally, that this will be an administration exercise, not a practical exercise of having to ship parts through different countries and foolish things like that, because that's just wasteful. We'll see. Whether the politicians can find an answer to a practical problem, I'm not so sure, personally. I'm not confident that they will be able to do this. So, these are some headlines. I would like in a moment to ask you a question, if you don't mind. That allows me to have a drink of water. From Austria's point of view, my understanding, from what I've read and researched, is that the impact of Brexit in Austria is not so big, because the amount of trade between the two countries is not so large. Having EasyJet coming is perhaps good for you. But I wonder if there are impacts in Austria outside the trade relationship that we have between our two countries, which is quite small, really. And I'm interested to hear from you about this. Are there impacts in Austria that I don't know about, that are not reported in Britain? Because in Britain at the moment, every day in the papers there is always something about Brexit. Every day. Quite a lot of things about Brexit, because for us it's quite interesting. For you probably it's one of many things that are on your agenda, and Brexit may be at the bottom of a list. I understand. It's interesting for me because I'm in it, but maybe less interesting for you. So I'm curious to know what your response to Brexit is. A good thing, a bad thing, maybe good, maybe bad, a problem, an opportunity. So, sorry, okay, let's go.
Business-wise, I'm in the IT business, and we are treating companies here in Austria. We don't think that it's a big deal, Brexit or not. You're absolutely right from the economical impact. But I think it was a huge impact. We have two sons, aged 24 and 26, and they have been really shocked. The younger people are really shocked by Brexit, because they have been very close connected by all these academical youth programs throughout all of Europe, and they are really shocked about what's going on now and what will be the situation in the future with all these exchange programs and free travel and something like that, because these are the generation which grew up in that time of the European Union, and they have really a shock about Brexit.
Yes, that's my experience too. I have two children, 21 and 22, and they themselves cannot understand why anybody would be so foolish as to destroy all of these opportunities for just travel, the Erasmus program, all of these things where people can learn, and you travel from different places as though it's normal. You go to EasyJet, Ryanair, Wizz Air, whatever. You just get on a plane, go there, visit, come home. There's no difference. Okay, maybe people speak differently, but of course most people speak English now, so English young people find that quite agreeable. The currency is different. Okay, we have to get used to different notes, but it's all the same everywhere else, isn't it? France, Germany, Austria, everybody uses the euro, so for our people that's quite good. Once they go across the channel, they know very well that it's euros. So maybe I'm being a bit jokey about this, but I think you're right. I think the young people in Britain certainly were shocked that this vote was in favour of leaving, and many of them still believe it will not happen. There are surveys that are, so I work in change management consultancy. So we have a concept in change management consultancy. I'm sure you know about the curve, the grief curve. They are still in denial, and many people are still in denial. Sorry, what do I believe? Well, I'll come to that in a moment. I will share my belief. I'm happy to share my belief with you, but in a moment, because what's quite interesting is the young people think it may not happen. But there are many adults, grown-ups, people, who are also saying the same thing. And they believe that if they try quite hard, maybe they can frustrate the process, that maybe when we get to the 29th of March 2019, on the 28th of March, somebody will say, oh, we withdraw Article 50. And there are people talking about this, because some lawyers have read the article, and there's nothing there that says it cannot be withdrawn. Once it's been placed, it doesn't have to be seen to the end. It could be withdrawn. And people are making a good story about this. Well, we can withdraw it, and if it's no good at the time, etc., etc. So there are still many people in Britain who feel that maybe it won't happen. My view, for me, I voted to stay. I think it's the right thing, but most of the country didn't. So only by a small amount, of course, but the country didn't. This is the price of democracy, and I think the problem we had, and many people have, when we have plebiscites, referendums, is that nobody knows enough to make the right decision. They go on emotion, not on facts. And the problem in Britain last year is the facts were not very well explained. People didn't care about the facts, actually. What they cared about was they didn't like all these people coming into the country not speaking English and taking our jobs and all of these emotional arguments, which factually were not really very true. But the emotion was the thing that won. Interestingly, in England, so we have our 4 countries, in England, the majority was quite high to leave if you exclude London. So London wanted to stay, because of course it's an international city. Everywhere else in England wanted to leave. Scotland wanted to stay, Northern Ireland wanted to stay, and Wales wanted to leave. So it's quite a strange picture inside Britain. The different regions have different opinions. And of course, what we want to be sure in Britain is that politically it doesn't lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom, which it could do. I think this, it's all possible. I don't think that will happen, and I think the reason why is that it's pulled Britain together, actually. In any case, when you have a threat or a problem, the country comes together, I think, generally. And I think what will happen is that we will leave, I think. I think there won't be any last-minute changes, but maybe I'm wrong. I didn't think anybody would vote to leave, so I got that wrong. Maybe I'm rubbish. What can I predict? I wouldn't put money on it, though. If you were betting, I don't know what the odds are that says that we'll leave, so we'll see. So, something else, yes?
I think people always adapt to the circumstances. Yeah. And that's what they will do also in this case. I think Brexit will happen because that's the conditions. Everybody would have to be destroyed. Not only Britain would have to be destroyed, also the other 27 would have to agree on it. So the question is, for me the main question is if Britain will leave with a deal or without a deal.
Yes, we'll come to that. That's a good point, yeah.
I guess there won't be a deal because essentially the European Union says, well, first you have to pay a big huge bill and then we talk about trade.
Yeah.
And obviously Britain is not very keen to throw a lot of money after the euro for getting nothing, just for the promise of talking about a deal.
So yeah, so normally if you have a divorce, I mean I'm not in this position, I am happy to say, but if you have a divorce, normally you discuss everything and the money is the last thing you discuss.
And what does it touch the side for you?
Precisely, because there are many things that will affect how the financial settlement looks. Access to the children, whether you have the CD collection, all of these things, But you talk about all of those first, and then the calculation is made of the money, and you decide whether you want to accept. For us in Britain, this is a strange process, where somebody wants us to talk about money before we know what the deal is. That's rather weird, and I don't know how Europe decided to do this, whether this is Michel Barnier or as an individual, or whether it's the European Commission or whoever. I don't know. What I do know is that the leaders of the different countries do have different views. The 27 are not united. Some people want to punish Britain for failing to support the European ideal, shall we say. Other people feel that we should let Britain leave quite quickly to stop disrupting the unity of the rest. So at one, you have two extremes and everybody in the middle. Where is Austria? I don't know where Austria is.
So my question to you would be actually, for me it's pretty sure that there won't be a deal because the positions are so different. So in that respect, Britain has actually three options. First is just to stay deal on the WTO basis, which is possible, not the best of all things, but is feasible for all sides. And Britain would have to do individual trade, could have individual trade agreements with all kinds of countries, which takes time. It's feasible, not the best thing, maybe. Maybe Britain could join NAFTA to compensate, so doing more business with North America to compensate the loss which will there with the EU. And Britain may also join EFTA again, actually having access to the market or the EU market without having to pay the divorce bill could also be an effective option. My question is, what do you think?
So my view, it's interesting. So this is today's newspaper called The Telegraph in Britain. If you know British newspapers, you will know that that's right wing. So that's over here, isn't it, for you? That's right middle sort of right wing newspaper. So this is their headline for today, which maybe you can read. This is about the involvement of the United States and the Commerce Secretary in the United States saying don't let the EU dictate to you what your deal is. We'll have you on board. We're happy to have a deal with you. What's quite interesting is if you look at the WTO rules about trade, most of the tariffs on most things are quite small. Actually, it's not a big deal. The big things are things like cars, aircraft, and we have a car industry, we have aircraft industry, so we have to be careful with that. But most other things are, the tariffs are very small in WTO. So it shouldn't be a problem, I think, with WTO. But it's very interesting that, as I say, every day in a newspaper you have a headline of some description. And at the moment they're focusing on the American involvement. So management consultancy is interesting because in most European countries, and I'm sure Austria is the same from what I know of your industry, most of your management consultancy business is at home. Most. In Britain, it's the same. 75% of management consultancy in Britain is done by British companies. 25% is outside, but only half of that is in Europe. The rest is elsewhere. So we have 10 or 15% of our business which is done outside. And the same is true for most other European countries. The model is very similar. In the big economies, anyway. Am I going to join Trump? Well, hopefully by then Trump will be out. Trump will be gone by then, I hope. Personally, I can have a personal opinion. I think the guy is an idiot, and I cannot understand why the Americans ever put him in power, but hey, that's a separate discussion. But I think, well, yeah, maybe. I think the issue with the United States is that Britain has always had a slightly different relationship with the United States than other countries because of history, and we trade a lot across the Atlantic. So there is a lot of history with the United States. Whether it's Trump or Clinton or anybody else, I don't think it matters particularly. Yes, well, NAFTA is interesting because I think the problem with NAFTA at the moment, Trump doesn't like NAFTA, of course, because he doesn't like Canadian lumber and Mexican cars and all sorts. He thinks the whole thing is rubbish. But he is persuaded, I think, that Britain would be a suitable partner to have a better trade deal with. And at the moment, that's his policy. If politics changes in America, maybe that will change. We don't know. I think, as you said, we will adapt, you know. Well, I think so, because I think Great Britain has a history of adapting. Sometimes we get it wrong. Sometimes we don't do very well. It's interesting that in the slides that you put up here, so this one, what this doesn't say is that up here, Britain tried to join twice. And de Gaulle said non, very strongly, absolument non, and would not tolerate Britain coming in because he saw it as a way of establishing French dominance in the continent of Europe following the war. And Britain was not really European anyway. He saw Britain as being much more influenced by the Americans. So politically and socially, which is true, I think. A lot has changed, of course, since then. But Britain, I think, as a nation, as a people, we're quite flexible, and mostly we don't have very strong political views. We don't have strong views about anything apart from trade, actually, which is why when we had where are we? Next one. When we had the Maastricht debate, which of course was the fundamental shift in the European Union. Instead of being a trade association, it became a political entity. Most British people, this went completely over their heads. They had no concept at all that this was very important at the time. And there was some fuss at the time, but we just basically ignored it. And I have a feeling that that is what has caused the problem that we're in right now. That because Maastricht embodied the ever closer union principle, politicians and the urban elite fully understood what this meant. But most people doing jobs had no idea. They quite liked the idea of being able to go to Europe without passports and with all sorts of things, easier travel, good trading arrangements. They had no understanding that this little tiny change was going to lead to this. And I think in retrospect, looking backwards, that was a problem on our part. I think we didn't take the opportunity at that time, because the politicians didn't want to have another referendum to say, do you really want political union? Because referendums are not in the culture of British politics and British society. We hardly ever have referendums. Some countries, Switzerland I know, has them all the time, don't they, Bettina? Is that right? I know Switzerland does. I don't know about Austria. Do you have referendums very often? Not very often at all, because it becomes a problem, doesn't it? If the people say one thing and the politicians were going to do something else, which is exactly the situation we are in now in Britain, what do you do? So the government was ill-prepared for the no vote. When the campaigning was taking place, there was no plan at all to deal with a no vote. And when it happened, everybody was silent because they had no idea what was going to happen next. But, you know, we just get on with it. So. Yes, I would say yes now. I don't know if it knows what it wants. It knows what it doesn't want, which is to be, I'm trying to find a polite way of saying this. It doesn't want to be beaten up by the people across the channel, by people in Brussels. It doesn't want to be shafted, I would say. That's a bit rude, but you understand what I mean. It's, they don't want to be taken advantage of. But what do they want? I don't know. And I don't think anybody in Britain knows what we actually want, because it's taken us such a long time to think about it. This is why, actually, it's why we need people like McKinsey here to come and tell us and come and help us, in the government at least, to say what's possible. What could you get out of this that you never really thought about before? Because actually this is about business. International relations in terms of politics and so on, Britain normally does fairly well at that. But in terms of trading relationships, it's never really found itself in this problem before. It likes free trade. Britain is quite an advocate of free trade. We would quite like to have free trade everywhere, then there wouldn't be any problems. But not everybody wants that, of course.
I'm involved in the European research program, Horizon 2020.
Ah, yes, good.
And I heard recently a recommendation that if you're thinking about forming a consortium for the next phase,
yes,
you should maybe not take up a British company. Because especially since the hard Brexit came up, you need, and you have to form a very competitive project, you know. If you lose the British partner, then you are in trouble.
And it is a problem. I think whenever anybody, it's like when somebody is going to leave a job and they announce, they give in their notice for 3 months in advance. Well, you don't ask them to come to any meetings after that, do you? Because it's a waste of time. And they can't make any contribution, they're not going to be there. The same is true here. I'm also involved with the Horizon 2020 project in London, which is running quite well and will run until June 2019, I think. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, but hey, so be it. So there are still some that are working effectively, but I agree, it is a problem. And this is why the transition, I think, between being in and being out is not as simple as having a hard Brexit where one day everything is in and the next day everything is out, because that's practically impossible. There will always be a planned exit, and just because the 29th of March 2019 is the date that has been agreed, it doesn't mean that everything will change on the 29th of March 2019.
Army is committed for the next phase of projects in 2024, yes. Maybe for projects that extend beyond 2020.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it is, and the Horizon 2020 project that I'm working on goes on beyond that, and it's being run and coordinated by a British consortium, a consultancy consortium. So there are examples where it is working, and I think this is where we have to be pragmatic. In Britain, I'm an engineer by profession, and being pragmatic is something that engineers, I think, generally are quite good at. So we always try to think, how practically can we do this? There may be some political aim or some grand vision, but we have to turn it into practical steps. And if a project finishes in June 2019, well, we'll let it finish. We're not going to stop it in March and give the money to somebody else just because a politician says so. So we have to find a way around this, I think. So what I wanted to show you, it's interesting that last time I came, I presented some statistics about what did consultancies think about what was going to happen. And there was some survey work done. And interestingly, I hope you can read this, but the survey was repeated. So what effect has Brexit had on your firm's revenue? Blue is October last year. I showed you that one before. Yellow is February. So not really much different. But interestingly, actually it's moved this way. You notice this? More positive. Because consultancies are doing work all about Brexit. So they were very worried that all the work would go away, the economy would stagnate. You may remember there were predictions in Britain by the Bank of England that everything was going to collapse, there would be a recession, all of these things. None of that has happened, of course not. So the effect on revenues has been mildly positive. February. So this is a quarterly survey, but when they did the February one, they stopped doing it again because there was no change, so they didn't bother doing it. This is interesting, that what effect did it have on client growth? And what's happened here is that the middle vote has disappeared, and some has, some has gone this way and some has gone that way. And this is about certainty, I think. That when people are asked, what effect will it have? If you don't really know, you'll say, well, it's probably going to be okay, not very much. But as people learn more, they realize that it will either go one way or the other. And that's what's happened here. But you can still see that clients are anticipating a negative effect of Brexit, management consultancy clients. That was in February. The survey has not been repeated, so I can't tell you what it's like now. I would say, personally, that actually it's less negative now than it was before, because people are more certain about what they're going to do. They have a plan. They're employing consultants who are actually working pretty hard, helping multinationals and big firms deal with the changes faced by Brexit. And actually what that's doing is taking the uncertainty away. One of the big issues, however, is this thing about labour, about recruiting skilled labour. Any consultancy, of course, relies on clients, but it also relies on its workforce. And in Britain, the consultancy workforce in the big firms is quite multinational. People come to London. Consultants like to come to London to work. There's no question about that. British consultants, some of them, like to go to Europe to work, but because they don't speak the languages, because this is a British problem, it's not so easy for them to adapt. Whereas consultants that come to London are typically very well educated and speak very good English, business English, and can find a home there. So you can see here that again it's the same principle, that it's moved here and moved here. But where previously there was no positive effect anticipated, now, interestingly enough, there is a positive impact. People want to come to London because, interestingly, actually, there's very interesting, exciting work going on there trying to sort out Brexit. And if you're a consultant from the continent, you know, European, the rest of Europe, coming to Britain to work on Brexit projects is actually quite interesting. I think that would be quite a motivating thing to do. And for the moment, while we have freedom of movement for consultants in Europe, they all want to come. Great. What will happen after March the 29th, 2019, we don't know. Because that's part of the discussion that we're negotiating at the moment. What will happen to people who are not British nationals who are in the UK on the date of the treaty being implemented? And we don't know the answer to that yet because they haven't finished discussing it. Let's see. I'll show you something in a minute that where the consultancy industry is now demonstrating it's a bit concerned about this. Because of course, we cannot imagine on the 30th of March all of the consultants in London being sent home, back to their home countries. Obviously that won't work. So we have to find a way of making this work. It's worse, though, I have to say, for low-paid agricultural workers and so on. The British agriculture would not survive if it were not for thousands of low-paid Eastern European fruit pickers that come to collect deal with all of our agriculture. That's a bigger problem than management consultancy, I have to say. And that's why, I imagine maybe it's the same here, where you have well-developed economies where labour is expensive, cheaper labour will come to do the jobs. But of course here you're in the European Union and you have freedom of movement, so people can come from anywhere to do this. What's quite interesting about people in London, I keep saying London, I mean Britain of course, but I should get my facts straight, is that KPMG did a survey in August, so this is only 2-3 months ago, where they asked EU citizens who were working in the UK right now and EU citizens who are elsewhere, back in their home countries, what do you think of the idea of coming to Britain to work? And the figures are almost the same, aren't they? It's a good idea, very attractive, quite attractive, neutral, not a very good idea, and a bad idea. Whether you ask people in their home country or nationals who are working in Britain, they say the same thing. They'd like to come to Britain, please. They're not too bothered about the uncertainty with Brexit and all of this lot. They just want to come. It seems an attractive place to be. Question? Okay, the question was asked about now, but this report is freely available on the internet actually. It's worth downloading and having a look at, because the reason it was done is for this issue of how do we make sure that in Britain we get labour coming into Britain when we need it and not when we don't. Because one of the big issues about the vote was about all those foreigners. We don't want them here. That was kind of the message, saying it bluntly, but that's what a lot of people felt. People were finding, and I think this is where I personally have a strong disagreement with this opinion, but it was an opinion that was held, that a lot of towns and areas in Britain were being overrun by people from other countries. They didn't like it, they didn't speak English, they had funny food in the shops, you know, the normal kind of anti-immigrant sentiment that occurs everywhere. It's not just in Britain. But of course, when people were given the vote to decide whether they felt that this was a good idea or not, many of them decided they didn't like it. And what they forgot was that all these people that are coming in are actually doing jobs and contributing to the economy and picking the potatoes and all of these things that have to be done. So still, people want to come. So we're pleased in a way. When we saw that analysis, we're quite pleased that people outside Britain are not saying, I never want to go there, it's horrible, they're all going to hate me and the atmosphere is no good and the conditions will be no good. So for us, the issue of people coming to Britain is positive. Of course, in Austria, it's quite interesting, isn't it? I don't know if you've seen this study. This is the Institute for Herrenstudien in Vienna. Did I pronounce that well? Probably not. In Vienna. Maybe you have seen this. You have seen this published. This person here, Klaus Weierstrass, presented this in Brussels in February. So maybe he's in the room. You're not in the room? No, I don't know. Do you know this person? Have you ever heard of this person? No. So it seemed very interesting to me because I was looking for things about Austria and about What did people say about Austria? As we've said before, the impact on the economy in Austria is probably not very strong. But these two issues here are big ones, I think, in people's minds. How will the missing money be made up? Who will pay? Will Austria pay more? Because Britain is a net contributor to the European Union budget, even though we don't like to pay as much as maybe some of the others. It is a net contributor, so when you take that away, other people will have to pay more, or the services will diminish. It's one or the other. Huh? And this issue of, because the UK is an opponent of strong regulation, that voice will disappear. So maybe there will be a move from this position, the centre of gravity will move this way towards more regulation, let's say over that side. So for me, this was quite an important message. I'm not sure how big a deal this is going to be. It will take some management consultants to work that out. I think nobody here is doing that, working on that project maybe. I don't know. But you've already got EasyJet, of course. Fantastic. So I don't know if any others have come here already or not. Do you know? I'm not aware of any. But EasyJet was a big name. And it made a very strong point, I think, that Austria actually is a very positive move for British organisations that are involved in distribution and travel. So logistics and so on, where you are, particularly between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, you know, Vienna historically has been a crossroads in that respect. So you can see why EasyJet would want to set up an operation somewhere like here, rather than being in, let's say, Brussels or in Hamburg or somewhere else. Here, of course, it means that you look to the east, which in Britain is a long, long way away. I mean, Vienna is a long way away from Britain. But actually, you know, looking from here eastwards and into the ex-Soviet republics and places like that, which for Britain, we really don't go anywhere near it. Politically, it's not in our consciousness to deal with countries like that. Whereas from here, it's much closer physically and closer emotionally and politically, I think. So you can see why EasyJet, I think, it'll be a good move for them. Now here's an organisation that you will have heard of, I hope, FEACO, the European Federation of Consultancy Organisations. They put out a statement in October, which maybe you have seen. I don't know, does anybody here involved with FEACO? Maybe. There was they're quite keen, you see, to make a statement about making sure that the consultancy industry is actually able to function properly across borders in Europe, as it has been previously. And they put out this statement last month to maintain levels of free trade and open trade in consulting. And they're saying, where possible, we should reduce trade and tariff barriers not add to them. I think it's quite interesting that they say this very loudly, but we know that only 10% of consulting business is done across borders. So actually, is it such a big deal? I'm not so sure. The issue is much more about the people coming, about the consultants moving, not about the customers. Because for those of you that know, I was involved, along with some others here, in writing a European standard and then an ISO standard for management consultancy services. Robert Bodenstein, who's one of your colleagues, was involved heavily in that project as well. And one of the drivers for that project was to set common standards across countries to make it easier for people to trade across borders. But what we know, actually, is that having common standards in consultancy makes no difference, because consultants are local. You have to know the local market. You have to understand the local conditions. If I, as a British consultant, want to come and work in Austria, for me, this would be very difficult. I don't speak German this much, so that's not very helpful. I don't really understand the structure here, the culture. Maybe I could work with an Austrian partner, maybe that would work, but I would never consider exporting my services here. Maybe collaboration and that sort of thing, but not exporting. So that's why they say they want to maximize the ability of the UK and EU27, who are consultants, to work freely within the UK. And this issue of allowing firms to establish offices in other countries. In the financial services industry, the whole thing about passporting is a real issue, which, if you understand financial services, you know what I mean, that if you have a license to operate in one EU country, you can operate anywhere. So all the people who have licenses to work in London and nowhere else have suddenly got to go ahead and get licenses in another EU country and think about how they're going to transfer their workload accordingly. So what we know is that financial services, there's a lot of people considering moving to Frankfurt. There was a story in the British press not long ago that one of the big merchant banks, can't remember which one, had bought up all the private schooling places in Frankfurt, so that there were none left for the next 5 years, because they know that people are going to come over with families and put their children in school, so they just block bought the whole lot. And so there are now futures trading in small children's school places in Frankfurt, which doesn't sound very reasonable to me, but hey, you know, big company with billions to spend, they can do this, can't they, and influence the market, which is rather sad, I think. So all these people put their names to this. Maybe you recognize these people here. They're not here, are they? No. Well, they're first on the list, huh? Because it's in English. A is for Austria, you see, whereas you put it down here somewhere, I suppose, don't you? But in English, because it's written in English, this version, they're at the top of the list. So it's interesting that these are a group of people who are worried about the consultancy industry in Europe and how it will work. And in particular, they're worried about how the EU27, let's say, will be able to access the British market, actually. The British market is not that interested, being honest, about accessing the EU27 market with individuals and exporting services. It does some, but not so much. Mostly it will be interested in keeping people and getting partnerships, working with other organizations. But actually selling services overseas is not something that it's doing a lot of. What it is doing now is setting up offices in other countries if we don't have them. But of course, most of the multinational consultancies have offices all over the place anyway, don't they? What they will lose is the opportunity of shipping consultants from one country to another to fill gaps on holidays for specialist needs and so on. That's their worry, I think, is how will they be able to do that? And because a lot of the big consultancy firms are managed either from the States or out of London, this is a big problem about how they will deal with this. So you can see why they're concerned about this. It's an issue, no question. So what I've tried to talk about today is a bit about Brexit generally, a bit about how it affects consultancy, a bit about how it affects Austria and Britain and how we work together. And when I was asked to come and do this, I was thinking by Claudia. She said, oh, it went down quite well last year. Would you like to come again and give an update? And when I was researching this to give an update, I was thinking, well, actually, what's changed initially? But an awful lot has changed, I think, in people's minds. I think people now accept the fact that Brexit will happen, whereas last year, when we were here, Article 50 had not been triggered. And there was a hope in many people's minds that it would not be, both in UK and in the rest of the EU. Of course, that didn't happen. It did get triggered, and I think it was always going to be honest. And now we have to deal with it. So the concept for consultancy and advice has moved from being theoretical, what might happen if, to being practical. To say, how can we make this happen in a pragmatic, positive, engaging way that actually delivers what these people are asking for. Flexibility for management consultancy in terms of people moving and contributing to work. Flexibility in terms of rules and regulations, no barriers, if you like, to getting clients, and establishing offices in different countries so that the consultancy industry is hardly affected. And therein lies a note of caution, I think. That if you go back before we had our referendum, the consultancy industry, I mentioned this last year, had hardly done any work at all on preparing for a no vote. There were very few pages, articles on the internet, advice to companies on what to do if there's a no vote. Of course, when the no vote took place, it caught out the consultancy industry as much as everybody else. So maybe they're partly to blame for the fact that nobody was prepared. We could argue that. They would say no, of course, because nobody expected it. But surely consultancy is there to give advice, and they could perhaps have thought better about really what they could do. But nobody at all was preparing for a no vote. In business, in politics, in consultancy, in law, in advice, nobody was preparing, either in Britain or in Brussels in the European Union. Nobody was preparing for this. So we've had to start from zero in June to 18 months ago. So in my opinion, a lot has been achieved in that time. It'll be interesting to see in a year's time, November 2018, when we're only then 4 or 5 months away from it actually happening, what the difference is between now and then compared to the difference between last year and this year. Because I think an enormous amount has happened now. People are accepting it's going to happen. People are working on practical solutions of what to do, being proper management consultants, I would say. What's going to happen between now and next year is a really tough change management exercise, where it's not just the consultants that have to work to make things happen, the clients have to as well. Because up to now, the clients haven't done so much. The consultants are doing a lot of work trying to advise and work out what needs to be done. The next year will be people doing that. So I'll be interested to see how that goes. These are some final headlines that I wanted to show you. This was the one I spoke about earlier, how the Bank of England, which got it wrong on many things actually, including the prediction that there would be many thousands of job losses and a big recession. What's quite interesting though is that the British economy is not growing at the same pace as some of the continental European economies. At the moment we've got quite good growth in European economy. Britain's growing a bit but not so much. So the belief now is that we would be growing much more if it wasn't for Brexit. But the fact is we are at least growing, which is good news. There's been no disaster, no calamity. This organisation, the CBI, is a British organisation that for employers. I'm not sure what the equivalent is here. It's like the big Chamber of Commerce, Chamber of Industry, if you like, like WKO, I guess, in UK. What's happening is that people are starting to get worried in Britain that if the negotiations stall and there is no apparent progress, people will move their businesses, their companies out of Britain. I think we have a saying in Britain about crying wolf. I don't know how that works in Austrian. In German, it's the same metaphor. Huh? That it depends what newspaper you read. It depends. If you read a newspaper that was really in favour of staying and so on, they will try and make out from the same piece of news that actually there's a real problem and it's all going to be a disaster. The people on the right over here will say, good for Britain, you know, absolutely stand up, we'll sort them out, you know, bulldog spirit, etc. You know, so quite nationalistic on this side, and over here it's all cooperative and we should be warm and cuddly with our European friends. So somewhere in the middle, the truth lies. There's no such thing, of course, as truth in that respect. But what's happening is that these non-governmental organizations like the CBI have realized that they need to warn their members that the sky might fall in. Because if it does fall in and they haven't warned them, then they will be criticized. What's happening, though, I think it's crying wolf mostly. I think people, the British particularly, will sort themselves out. They will be flexible, will work something out. What we know is that some businesses will have to move. Some manufacturing, supply chain businesses will get moved around, particularly in the large automotive sector, for example. Things will start to be made and assembled in different places because it works better fiscally or politically. That's bound to happen. But for service industries mostly service their local markets. Consultancy is no different in that respect. Some consultancies, they'll move. Dublin has been a destination of choice for organisations to set up companies. But of course, mostly they're working in Dublin and they're based in Dublin, but they still work in Britain because at the moment they can. So politically, how that will work in future, I don't know. It's a bit like in the press at the moment, there's a lot about where money lives and where do Apple pay their taxes and is it in different places, this Paradise Papers that have come out. I bet it'll just be the same. It'll just be the same with consultancy, with other service industries. They'll find a way of saying, well, we're headquartered here, but most of our people are over there, and we'll provide a service through that third party and over here, and we never have to leave home because it's all online anyway. So actually, I think a lot of this will be about the European Union coming to terms with the digital age where a lot of service industries are not delivered in person, they're delivered virtually, and it doesn't really matter where people are. And if it means that you have to route your e-traffic through a neutral country somewhere to prove that it has gone out of Europe and come back in again in half a microsecond, then people will do it, they'll find a way. In the same way that money is routed around to avoid different taxes and problems. We have the Amsterdam effect, don't we? Where people can ship to Amsterdam and then go somewhere else and avoid duties. You know, it's a scam, but it's a European Union scam. That if you ship something to Amsterdam and then ship it somewhere else, Dutch taxes apply and Dutch taxes are lower. And because Amsterdam is a big port, you can put something straight in and take it straight out again, and actually you pay less VAT or something like that. If anybody knows exactly how that works, please come and tell me. So, the clock is ticking. We can't stop the clock ticking. What I'm hoping I've been able to do, and I'm sorry we started a bit late because of my tour of Vienna. I hope you found this just an interesting and stimulating way to think about Brexit, how it's working, how it might affect you, how we might cope with it, how you might cope with it. Sometimes I think the impacts on you, although your Austrian colleague, when he presented this in Brussels in February, said that the impact on Austria would not be so great, actually maybe you have got more opportunity than you think. Treat this as an opportunity, not as a threat, I would, and see what you can do. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any questions that you like. Yes, question.
Actually, I guess this was a very interesting tour for everything which is related to Brexit. Starting with my bottom line, I consider Brexit a disaster.
Okay.
A big disaster for a specific country. You have shown us a lot of information which is related to politics, which is related to programs and so on. If I get to economy, we have a number of major players. We have the Americans, we have the Chinese, we have the Indians coming up. very quickly. I'm just wondering who will succeed besides the big economy in 20 years from now. Because the economy is a zero-sum game. If you get additional market share, additional profit, somebody else will lose. That's the way it is. So, since the economy is a competitive environment, so basically one is competing against the other. Looking at the European Union, which is not really in good shape, looking at what the United Kingdom is just doing, I'm asking myself, how can in 20 years from now, neither you nor the European Union prove that they have won?
I think your question is not answerable within the time we have left this week, because it's very complicated, if you don't mind me saying. But I think the question that the European Union has to answer, I think, is it moved away in Maastricht from being a trading association to being a political association. That's a fundamental shift, which only now, I think, people are realizing may have been a step too far. Unwinding that is almost impossible, because we have different political freedoms and institutions that have been put in place. That's what Britain has found. Britain's belief, I would say, is that it finally got to the point where it didn't want to keep taking steps towards ever closer union. That actually there came a point where it said, actually no, I'm close enough, thank you. I don't want any more. And as soon as somebody says one more thing, it affects our economy. You talk about the economy. There's a big difference, I think, between political dialogue and economic performance. If we want to all be friends with each other and not fight and kill each other in war, then political dialogue is vital. And actually in Europe, it's been mostly successful since the Second World War, of course. Not completely, but mostly. That political dialogue and that engagement needs to continue, in my opinion, I have to say. Britain is just saying, we don't feel the need to be part of that. And I think there will be other countries that will say the same thing. That we're very happy for the big powers in continental Europe, France and Germany, in effect, to actually be friends, make sure they don't get grumpy with each other. We're keen to make sure that the Russian influence politically is limited, and therefore through NATO, which is our preference, not through the idea of having a European army and so on. We think that that's the right way of doing things, but I think it's somebody needs to write a book on it. And then when they've written it, it will be out of date and somebody else will write a book on it with another opinion. So there we are.
From my statement, based on economy, they back to politics. If you follow me to economy again, isn't it a responsibility for us to have a prosperous, healthy environment to our children and children? The moment the competitive environment of economy has reached a point where the ones who are losing very hard and the ones who are winning whatever, you will have social unrest.
You will, and I think, free trade works as long as the partners in a free trade agreement are roughly at the same level. Otherwise, we're exploiting the third world, and that's not so good. I'm not so sure whether I'm competent to answer the question, I'm afraid. I think you've asked me a question which I have opinion on and I have a view on, but I'm not a geopoliticist and I'm not an economist. So my ability to give you a coherent answer, I think, has probably reached its limit now. Thank you for the invitation. I would love to come back 20 years. I'll have no hair then, not just grey hair, but that's okay. So I'm very happy. Thank you for the invitation. So, any other thoughts or questions? Okay, perhaps we should... Oh, one more. Go on.
Do you think there is a chance for a second referendum once the deal is fixed? Because you would imagine you are asking, do you want this kind of Brexit?
No, Because what if the answer is not the one that we expected? Because that's the problem now. I think we've had our referendum. We shouldn't have had it in the first place, but we had it. It voted in a way that wasn't the way that most business and political people wanted. But now the implementation is given to the politicians. And I think there will be, in Britain anyway, there will be arguments politically between the different parties about what should be done and what shouldn't be done. There may be an election that actually might take place in order to embed a particular opinion, but I think that's how we'll do it. We'll do it with an election, not with a referendum, because I think the danger of a referendum coming up with a result that is perverse is quite high, and as it did last time. So there we go. That's my opinion. Yeah.
So it might be an election that we pay.
There might be.
I'm wondering if the Conservatives are so keen on another election.
No. Well, that was a bit foolish, wasn't it? You see that sometimes political people make stupid decisions, and that was a stupid decision, wasn't it? If you followed the politics in Britain, you'll know that the ruling party decided that they would like to cement their majority and improve it once they'd got Brexit going. So they had an election and their majority reduced, and now they are in a very tight minority. So that was a bit stupid, really. But I think politicians in Britain realise that to make the government fall over Brexit would be foolish, because the people wouldn't tolerate it. They would imagine it was playing political games. However, to say, this is the deal, once it's negotiated, we're going to call an election and we want you to vote us in on the basis of that this is the deal we have reached, and the other party would say, we would have a different deal, that would be the way that I think it might go. I hope not. Because, you know, the pound has already fallen by 15–20%. You know, more turmoil and uncertainty, it'll fall even more, which is no good for us, but it's actually quite good for our exports, actually. But when we come here, it's very expensive. You know, everything has gone up by 20%. But for our exports, and actually tourism, come to Britain. It's very cheap, I have to say. And the weather's not so cold in Britain as it is here. So in the winter, I can recommend coming over. Bring your euros. You know, we quite like them. So I have no idea, really. Anyway, one more at the back. Yes, France.
Jeremy, do you know something about the place of justice? Because there was always a discussion when Britain leaves citizens, in Europe and European.
Yes. So this is one of the major issues that is, yeah, it's still unsolved. So I'll explain this. If one of you is living in London and the Brexit comes and you're still living in London, and you have a problem and you want to appeal to the European Court of Human Rights or something like this, Britain will say, well, that's tough, because when we leave the European Union, all of those European court things disappear. And our law is what applies in Britain, thank you very much, not European law. And this is a big issue, because the Europeans want, I understand, European law to apply in Britain to people from the EU 27, but not to the British people, because we can have our own law, thank you very much. And many people in Britain think this is totally unreasonable. In the same way that if you went to America, you would expect American law to apply to you. If you committed a crime or you wanted to appeal a decision, it would go to the US Supreme Court. It wouldn't come back to the European Court. Our view would be the same, I have to say. I cannot understand for 1 minute why anyone in Europe, I mean across the channel, anybody, any of you lot, you know, why anybody over here would say, well, of course it's absolutely right that our citizens, when in Britain, should have the right to appeal to European courts, when there is no such legal position. So I'm not sure where that will go. I think that will have to disappear, because it doesn't make sense. There is no international precedent for this anywhere. And what the Europeans are saying is, we want it to apply. I can't see how that's going to work, personally. But yeah, that's another thing on the list for negotiation, isn't it, really? So there we go. I think I should stop there, shouldn't I? And then we can have networking. Oh, you did your networking first, didn't you? While I was
No.
while I was walking
Thank
around.
you.
But we can have some
Thank
more.
you.
So there you are. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for your insights, for your perspectives, for your aspects on the Brexit problem, sort of. Yeah. We on the other side of the water. Yeah, no, we have time for networking, no doubt about that. Yeah. Our discussion, I think, if there are no further questions, we can end our Brexit evening sitting like this. We can have our buffet if you want to, yeah, in the other room. And it was nice having you here this evening, and looking forward to next November 2018. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you.